They came from far beyond the stars, traveling through endless darkness for what felt like centuries. To them, this small blue planet was nothing more than a dot in the corner of an old star map, a forgotten world that no one had ever explored. The Valoran explorers believed they were the first living beings intelligent enough to set foot here. They thought this planet was untouched, unrecorded, and completely unknown. When their ship entered orbit, they were surprised by what they saw. Below them was a world covered in clouds, oceans, mountains, and forests. It wasn't a dead world as they expected. It was alive, full of movement, energy, and color. The deep blue of the oceans reflected the sunlight, and patches of green spread across the land like veins of life. Even from orbit, it was breathtaking. One of the explorers stood near the viewing window, silent for a long time. "It's strange," he said quietly. "It feels familiar somehow." But none of them could explain that feeling. They didn't know this world. None of their records mentioned it. Yet deep inside, each of them felt an odd pull, as if the planet itself was calling them back, like a forgotten memory waiting to be remembered. Their mission was simple: explore, collect samples, and study the planet's past. They named it Valora 9, following their usual catalog order for new discoveries. They didn't realize this world already had a name long before their civilization existed: Earth. The team descended into the atmosphere, their ship cutting through thick clouds and storms. From above, they could see huge mountain chains covered in snow, golden deserts stretching to the horizon, and forests so dense that even their scanners couldn't read what was inside. But what caught their attention most was not the natural beauty. It was the ruins. Across the continents, scattered under layers of soil and rock, were signs of something artificial: perfect geometric shapes, straight lines, and massive stone structures half buried in the ground. Some stood alone in empty plains, others were swallowed by jungles or frozen beneath ice. The explorers were amazed. "So there was life here," one said. "A civilization, maybe primitive, but real." They landed their ship near a mountain valley where satellite scans had shown large clusters of ruins. When they stepped outside, the air was cold but breathable. The gravity felt light and comfortable. The sky had a faint golden glow from the setting sun. It was quiet, too quiet. The ground beneath their boots was covered with ancient stone paths, cracked and faded with age. They followed a trail that led to what seemed like an old city. Buildings once stood tall here, but now only broken walls and pillars remained. Strange symbols were carved into the stones, symbols none of their translators could read. Yet something about the place didn't feel completely abandoned. The air had an energy, a pulse that was hard to describe. Every sound, every movement seemed to echo with memory. One explorer brushed dust off a piece of metal buried in the ground. The material was unlike anything they had seen before: smooth, light, but impossible to cut. Their scanners couldn't identify it. "It's not natural," said one. "And it's not primitive either." The ruins stretched for miles. The deeper they went, the more advanced the structures became. Underneath the stone layers, they found traces of complex tunnels, energy conduits, and what looked like power cores, long dead, but still giving faint readings. That discovery changed everything. It meant the people who once lived here were not simple villagers or farmers. They were engineers, builders, maybe even scientists, and they were far more advanced than the explorers had expected. By the end of the first day, the team realized this wasn't just another lost world. There was history here, deep, ancient, and powerful. As night fell, they returned to their ship to rest. The stars above the valley were brighter than any they had ever seen. Some said they felt like they were being watched. Others tried to laugh it off, saying it was just the feeling of standing on a silent planet for the first time. But the unease never left them. The next morning, they began scanning the planet's deeper layers. One reading caught their attention: a massive energy signal coming from beneath the southern pole. It wasn't natural. It was steady, rhythmic, and far too precise to be a geological phenomenon. The commander ordered a small group to investigate. They traveled in a smaller craft, crossing icy winds and blinding snowstorms until they reached the coordinates. What they found there left them speechless. Beneath the ice lay an enormous structure, perfectly circular, stretching for miles in every direction. It wasn't made of stone or metal, they recognized. Its surface shimmered like liquid glass. Even under kilometers of frozen layers, Their instruments detected faint energy pulses, still active after what could have been millions of years. The explorers set up camp and began drilling carefully through the ice. Every layer they melted revealed more of the strange structure, walls, corridors, and towers buried deep below. The deeper they went, the more their equipment started to malfunction. Compasses spun uncontrollably. Lights flickered. Their data screens filled with static. One scientist, trying to record the energy frequency, noticed something unusual. The pulses matched the rhythm of a heartbeat. Not exactly, but close enough to make everyone uncomfortable. When they finally reached the surface of the structure, they found markings engraved into it, lines and curves that glowed faintly when touched. The symbols were identical to those found in the ruins of the first valley. But here, they looked newer, as if they had been preserved by the ice itself. They took samples, recorded data, and sent everything back to orbit. The main ship's AI struggled to process the information. No known material match, it repeated. No known energy pattern. No historical record found. It was as if the planet was hiding a secret from the rest of the universe. That night, the explorers gathered around a heater, sharing quiet thoughts. Some wondered if this place had once been a powerful civilization that destroyed itself. Others believed it was an ancient outpost built by another species. But one of them, the quietest member of the group, said something that silenced everyone. "What if they weren't destroyed?" he said softly. "What if they left?" The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. No one replied, but deep down they all felt the same strange fear. If the ones who built this place had left, where did they go? And more importantly, why did they seal this power under the ice? On the fifth day, while studying a glowing section of the structure, they triggered something by accident. The ice beneath their feet vibrated slightly. Then a low humming sound filled the air. The lights on their suits flickered again. The sound grew louder, not mechanical but organic, like a living creature stirring from a deep sleep. Before they could retreat, a wave of light burst from the surface of the buried structure, spreading outward in a perfect circle. The shock wave knocked them down, but strangely it didn't harm them. Instead, every device they carried went silent. The planet itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, for a brief moment, they heard a sound, not through their ears but in their minds. A whisper, a single word, impossible to translate, but carrying a weight of authority and age. And just as quickly everything went quiet again. The lights on their devices flickered back on. The hum disappeared. The ice stopped moving. It was as if nothing had happened, but something had happened. When they checked their ship's data, they found that the planet's magnetic field had shifted slightly. For the first time in thousands of years, Earth had responded. None of them could sleep that night. The stars above the frozen plain seemed different, sharper, brighter, and somehow alive. The quiet explorer looked up and whispered to himself, "We were never the first to come here." He was right. They had not discovered Earth. Earth had allowed them to arrive. The frozen silence of the southern pole carried a strange heaviness after that day. The explorers had returned to their camp, shaken by what they had experienced. The energy wave that burst from the ice still haunted their thoughts. No one could explain it. The readings showed a massive power spike, yet there was no visible damage anywhere. It was as if the planet had simply awakened for a moment, then gone back to sleep. When morning came, the sky was painted in soft shades of blue and pink, the kind of beauty that felt unreal in such an empty place. The team moved carefully, walking over the freshly frozen surface that covered the mysterious structure again. The cracks from the night before were sealed, as if the ice had healed itself. They started scanning again. This time the readings were even stranger. The entire glacier seemed alive with low-frequency vibrations. It was almost like the ice itself was breathing. The team's instruments showed energy waves traveling under their feet in repeating cycles. Whatever was buried there, it wasn't dead. The lead researcher decided to set up deeper drills. They worked slowly, melting layer after layer of solid ice. Hours passed, then days. The deeper they went, the stronger the strange vibrations became. Sometimes their equipment would shut down completely, only to restart minutes later on its own. And then one day, something unexpected happened. The drills hit a hollow space. The readings went wild. Under the thick ice was not just a structure, it was an entire city. Using robotic probes, they sent small camera drones down through narrow shafts. What they saw on their screens left everyone speechless. Beneath them lay an enormous chamber, larger than any city they had ever seen on other planets. It was made of smooth metallic walls curving in ways that defied normal geometry. The floor shimmered faintly as if reflecting light from somewhere deep below. In the center stood a massive circular monument, perfectly preserved. Symbols were carved around it, glowing softly in a rhythm that matched the energy readings they had recorded earlier. The explorers watched in complete silence. They didn't understand what they were looking at, but it was clear this was no ordinary ruin. This was a place of power, something built by hands far more advanced than they could imagine. As they maneuvered the camera closer, they noticed something even more unbelievable. On the walls were carvings showing tall figures, human figures. The shapes, the posture, even the facial structure matched perfectly with human anatomy. "How could this be?" one of the explorers whispered. "Humans here? That's impossible." But there was no mistake. The carvings showed scenes of humans standing beside strange machines, controlling streams of light and energy. The designs were artistic but precise, more like records than decoration. The Valoran explorers stared at the images in disbelief. Their entire civilization had believed that humans were primitive, limited to one small planet that had long been destroyed by time. Yet here, under the frozen ground, was evidence that humans had once been the masters of a power beyond their understanding. They decided to explore physically. After reinforcing their suits, a small group descended through a narrow tunnel into the buried city. The air inside was cold but breathable, thick with an ancient stillness. The floor beneath them was covered in fine dust that shimmered faintly when light hit it. Every step echoed across the empty hallways. The deeper they went, the more they realized how massive the place truly was. Entire corridors led to tall gates that had not been opened for thousands of years. Some doors still had faint energy fields glowing across them, as if protecting what lay inside. They came across panels and control stations covered with symbols. Some surfaces reacted to their presence, glowing when touched, almost as if recognizing them. The explorers were careful not to disturb anything, but curiosity pushed them forward. At one point, one of them found a circular platform surrounded by glass pillars. When they approached, the pillars began to hum softly. Light patterns started to appear on the ground, moving in smooth waves. The air felt warmer, charged with quiet power. "Don't touch anything," the team leader said, but his voice shook. They stood there, frozen, watching the lights flow in circles. It was hypnotic, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Then suddenly a faint holographic image flickered to life in the middle of the room. It was blurry, unstable, but it was definitely a figure. A tall human figure wearing ancient armor. The explorers froze. The hologram didn't move or speak, but it seemed to be looking directly at them. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting an intelligence that felt real. Before they could analyze it, the image vanished, leaving behind a wave of static that distorted all communication devices for several minutes. When their systems returned, every scanner in the area showed one terrifying result. The energy under the ice was rising again. They quickly retreated to the surface, but the vibrations followed them. The ground beneath the ice cracked slightly, releasing a deep rumble that echoed across the frozen land. It wasn't an explosion, but something beneath was definitely moving. For hours they waited, unsure of what to do next. The readings showed massive energy levels, but no visible change. Slowly, the signals began to fade again until everything returned to silence. It was during that silence that the explorers realized something important. The energy wasn't random. It was responding to them. Every time they approached the structure, it reacted. Every scan, every movement, triggered a response. It was as if the planet recognized their presence. Or perhaps it recognized something within them. Days turned into nights. The team kept collecting samples and analyzing data, but no one spoke about what they truly felt. A sense of awe had replaced fear. They knew they had found something far older than their civilization, something that could change everything they believed about life in the galaxy. One night, while the others were asleep, one explorer returned to the excavation site alone. He stood near the frozen surface, staring down at the faint light coming from below. He reached out his hand and touched the ice. To his surprise, the light grew brighter under his palm, as if reacting to him personally. He quickly stepped back, breathing heavily. For a moment he thought he heard a voice, soft and distant, whispering through the wind. It wasn't clear, but it sounded almost human. The next day, the entire area began to shift again. The energy pulses spread outward, reaching further than before. Even their orbiting ship detected the increase. The main computer struggled to calculate the power level. The readings were so high they didn't make sense. One of the scientists finally said what everyone was thinking. This isn't a ruin. It's a machine, and they were right. The entire buried city wasn't just a place, it was a massive living mechanism. The structure beneath the ice wasn't dead or forgotten. It was dormant, waiting. That night, as snow fell quietly around their camp, the explorers gathered in silence. The wind outside howled through the dark, but no one dared to speak. Each of them could feel it. The deep hum beneath the ground, faint but steady like a heartbeat echoing through the planet. They were no longer just studying a discovery. They had become a part of it. Far above them, in the orbiting ship, a soft alarm started to sound. The sensors had picked up a transmission, a signal coming from deep below the Antarctic ice. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, rhythmic, repeating every few minutes. They played the signal through the ship's speakers. The sound was deep, ancient, and strangely emotional, a mix of tones and echoes that seemed to carry meaning, though no one could translate it. And then, buried in the static, a single word repeated in a language none of them had ever heard before, yet somehow they all understood it instinctively. It was a word that made their hearts pound. It meant return. For days, the strange signal continued to echo through the icy air, repeating the same single word over and over. Return. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried something deeper, a vibration that seemed to move through their bones. Every time the explorers heard it, they felt something stir inside them, like a memory trying to surface. The main research ship in orbit received the same signal. No one could explain where it was coming from. The frequencies weren't mechanical. They were biological and alive. The scientists were baffled. Machines didn't usually sound like heartbeats. Down on the surface, the cold winds blew endlessly, but the energy under the ice was growing stronger each day. The explorers could see faint blue lights shining through the cracks in the glacier. Sometimes at night, the lights would pulse softly like the planet itself was breathing in rhythm. One of the explorers recorded the lights for hours, comparing them to the vibrations in the ground. To his surprise, they matched perfectly. Each pulse of light came with a wave of sound from deep below. The planet wasn't random, it was communicating, but with what? Or with whom? The team decided to build a communication array directly above the buried city. They wanted to respond to the signal, to send something back. Maybe it would help them understand what they had awakened. They worked day and night setting up transmitters and receivers across the icy plain. The air was cold enough to freeze breath instantly, but they kept going. Every movement, every step was done carefully. They all felt like they were standing on sacred ground. When the array was finally ready, they sent a test pulse into the ground. Just a soft, harmless sound wave. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the entire valley began to vibrate. The ground trembled so gently it felt almost like a heartbeat beneath their feet. The machine started flashing with readings they couldn't process. The energy field below had suddenly multiplied in strength. The scientists stared at their screens in disbelief. "It's responding," one whispered. Suddenly, a beam of light shot straight up from the ice, disappearing into the clouds. The beam wasn't bright like fire. It was soft, silver, almost calm. Yet its power was beyond anything they had ever measured. It passed straight through their communication system, disabling every electronic device for miles. For nearly 30 seconds, the light stayed there, humming softly. Then as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The sky fell silent again, and the temperature dropped sharply. Everyone stood in shock. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the wind brushing over the frozen landscape. Then their radios came back online. Static filled the speakers, followed by a faint sound by a voice. It was deep, calm, and ancient. No translation device could understand it, yet every person who heard it somehow understood the meaning. The voice said, "You have touched what was never meant to sleep." The message repeated once, then stopped. The explorers stood frozen, staring at one another, each trying to make sense of what they had just heard. It wasn't a threat, but it carried warning, like a teacher scolding a child for playing with something dangerous. They decided to dig deeper, to see what was inside the glowing city under the ice. They wanted answers, not fear. The next morning they began drilling again, carefully opening a passage into the massive central chamber they had seen through their camera drones earlier. The deeper they went, the warmer the air became until frost stopped forming on their suits. It was hard to believe they were still in Antarctica. When they finally reached the chamber, the sight took their breath away. The room was gigantic, with walls stretching higher than any cathedral. The same circular monument stood in the center, surrounded by tall columns of transparent material that glowed faintly. The floor was covered with markings, spirals, lines and symbols arranged in patterns that looked almost like star maps. Every few seconds the lines would light up and fade again in rhythm with that same deep pulse. They approached slowly, scanning the symbols. The material reacted to their presence, brightening as they walked closer. The entire room seemed aware of them. One explorer raised a device to record the energy pattern. As soon as he pressed the button, the pulse grew louder. The air began to vibrate. A low hum filled the chamber, spreading through the walls and up the columns. Then, without warning, the monument in the center began to rise. Dust fell from its surface as ancient mechanisms activated for the first time in ages. A column of light shot from its peak, hitting the ceiling and scattering into thousands of tiny fragments that floated in the air. Those fragments started forming shapes, moving images, like memories projected into the space around them. They saw cities made of crystal stretching across continents, towers reaching into the clouds, oceans filled with glowing ships that moved without engines, and in those cities, humans. Not the fragile modern kind, but tall, strong, and radiant. Their eyes glowed faintly and their skin shimmered with light. They were controlling energy directly with their hands, bending light and matter as if it were part of them. The explorers watched in silence, realizing that what they were seeing wasn't fantasy. It was history. The humans of the past, and in the ancient ones, had mastered power beyond understanding. They had built machines that could create life and weapons that could move planets. They had traveled between stars before most of the galaxy's civilizations had even formed. Then the images changed. The bright cities began to burn. Massive explosions lit up the skies. The same humans who had created wonders were now destroying them. They saw entire continents vanish in storms of light, oceans rising and falling in seconds, skies darkening. And finally, they saw one last image, a group of humans standing before the great monument, the same one now glowing before the explorers. They placed their hands on its surface and the entire planet pulsed once. Then everything went dark. The projection faded. The light in the room dimmed. Silence filled the space again. The explorers stood there trying to breathe. What they had just seen felt real, as if the planet itself had shown them its memory. One of them whispered, "They destroyed themselves." But another voice replied, "No. They hid themselves." It made sense. The monuments, the buried cities, the energy fields, it wasn't destruction. It was protection. The ancient humans had sealed their power away, locking it deep within the planet, waiting for the right moment to awaken again. And now, because of the explorers' curiosity, that moment had come. Suddenly, the monument pulsed again, brighter than before. Their sensors went wild. A new energy signal shot through the crust, reaching the surface and spreading around the planet in waves. In orbit, the research ship detected it immediately. Alarms filled the control room. The entire planet was now emitting a massive energy field, one that extended far into space. It was broadcasting something, but they didn't know what. On the surface, the explorers watched in awe as the ice around them began to crack and rise. It didn't break apart. It floated, gently lifting into the air before turning into shimmering mist. The temperature rose and the wind stopped. For the first time in history, the Antarctic air was completely still. The ground beneath them glowed faintly, lines of light spreading outward like veins. The planet was awake. Then came the sound again, that deep echoing voice. It filled the air, surrounding them from every direction. "Your kind left," it said, "but your world remembers." The explorers couldn't respond. Their suits' communication systems failed again. All they could do was stand and listen. The light from the monument grew even stronger. Shapes appeared in the glow, outlines of human figures like shadows of the past. They didn't move, but their presence was powerful, almost comforting. Then the light faded completely. The pulse stopped. Silence returned. The explorers were left standing in the middle of the chamber, surrounded by soft blue dust that glowed like starlight. Everything was still. After several long minutes, the lead researcher finally said, "It's not just a city. It's a memory, waiting to continue." They collected samples, took recordings, and returned to the surface. None of them spoke much. Their faces were pale, their thoughts heavy. They knew what they had seen wasn't just history. It was a message and a warning and maybe a promise. The power that had once belonged to Earth's first humans was still here, hidden deep beneath the ice, alive and aware. As they left the site, they didn't notice that the monument below had begun pulsing again, quietly this time, as if breathing in its sleep. High above, in the orbiting ship, one final signal appeared on the monitors. It was faint but clear, a new message from the planet's surface. It said only one thing: the awakening has begun. After the awakening under the ice, the world around the explorers no longer felt the same. The air carried a strange weight, like a silent echo of something ancient that had just stirred. The vibrations had stopped, the lights had faded, but deep inside every explorer, a quiet understanding had settled. They had not just discovered ruins. They had awakened a memory, one that had been sleeping for ages. When they returned to their ship, the systems were filled with strange data. Every screen flickered with unreadable symbols that appeared and disappeared in seconds. Even the central computer, built with advanced artificial intelligence, couldn't interpret them. The only thing it could translate was a repeated pattern that looked like a map, a path leading somewhere beneath the planet's surface. The coordinates pointed to another location, far away from the frozen pole. It was a vast desert on the other side of the planet, a place that had once been part of an ancient ocean. The team decided to follow the signal. They packed their research tools and set off once again, unaware of how deep this journey was about to go. The trip across the planet was long and silent. From above, Earth looked breathtaking. A sleeping giant wrapped in blue and green, holding secrets no one had dared to uncover. As they descended into the desert, they saw huge patterns carved into the sand, too large to be seen from the ground. Circles, lines, and shapes stretched across miles. It was as if someone had drawn messages for the sky itself. They landed their ship near the center of the markings. The scanners immediately detected strong energy signals below. Buried deep under the sand was another structure, much larger than the one under the ice. It was a perfect square formation, stretching miles in every direction. The team began digging carefully. The sand shifted easily, as if the planet itself wanted them to uncover what was hidden. Within hours, they reached the top of an enormous platform made of dark stone. Strange writing covered its surface, the same symbols they had seen glowing under the ice. They cleaned off the surface, revealing a large circular entrance in the middle. The door was smooth and cold, made of a material that didn't match any known element. There was no visible lock or handle, only a faint pulse of light in the center. As they studied it, one of them reached out and placed a hand over the glowing spot. Instantly, the pulse grew stronger. The ground beneath them vibrated, and the circular door began to rotate silently. Sand slid away as the platform opened slowly, revealing a stairway spiraling deep underground. No one spoke. They could feel that this was not just another ruin. It was something sacred. The air from below was warm and dry, carrying a faint scent of metal and dust. They descended carefully, their lights cutting through the darkness. The deeper they went, the clearer the air became, as if some ancient system was still purifying it. Finally, they reached the bottom. Before them stretched an enormous underground hall that looked untouched by time. The ceiling shimmered faintly, reflecting light from unknown sources. The walls were lined with massive pillars, each covered in writing and carved images of humans holding spheres of light in their hands. In the center of the hall stood a circular platform surrounded by glass-like structures. Each one glowed faintly, showing moving images within. The explorers realized with awe that these were archives, living records, storing fragments of a civilization that had long vanished. As they approached the nearest one, the image inside became clear. It showed a city unlike anything they had ever seen. Massive towers of crystal, golden bridges, and people moving through streets that shimmered with soft light. The air looked alive, filled with floating energy threads connecting everything. The archives weren't just visuals. They carried emotion too. The explorers could feel the peace and harmony of the world they were watching. The humans in those records were advanced but not cold or distant. They lived with balance and technology and nature moving as one. They touched another archive and the scene changed. Now they saw grand meeting halls, humans speaking to one another with gestures that seemed to create sound without words. Their thoughts connected directly and their emotions shaped the air around them. The explorers stood speechless. They were watching the rise of an ancient human empire, not of war but of unity. A world where people had reached the peak of evolution, controlling not just machines but the very essence of life itself. But as they continued exploring the archives, the tone changed. The next vision was darker. Skies filled with fire, oceans boiling, continents cracking apart. The once peaceful humans now fought among themselves. Energy weapons flashed across cities, tearing through what they had built. The explorers watched in silence as entire regions disappeared in storms of light. It was a war beyond imagination. A war not fought for land or power, but for control over creation itself. The ancient humans had mastered forces that could reshape planets, but in the end, that power turned against them. One of the explorers whispered, "They destroyed themselves again." But the final archives told a different story. In the last vision, a group of humans stood together in a vast hall, the same hall the explorers were standing in now. They were calm, their faces filled with both sadness and wisdom. The leader among them raised a hand and a beam of light spread across the room. The walls began to glow with the same symbols that now surrounded the explorers. Then, one by one, the ancient humans placed small glowing crystals into the pillars, sealing them like messages for the future. The leader spoke words that echoed faintly through the air as if carried through time. The explorers couldn't understand the language, but they felt its meaning. It was a farewell, a promise. The last of the ancient humans had locked away their knowledge and power, leaving it hidden deep inside the earth. They had chosen to vanish, not because they were defeated, but because they knew their power was too dangerous to remain. As the vision faded, the platform beneath the explorers' feet began to hum softly. The symbols on the walls lit up again, one by one spreading across the entire chamber. The archives had recognized their presence. Suddenly, a calm, clear voice echoed through the hall. It wasn't loud, but it carried incredible strength. "You have seen our truth," it said. "You carry our reflection." The explorers froze. The voice wasn't coming from their radios or equipment. It came from everywhere, the air, the walls, the floor. It spoke directly into their minds. The voice continued, "We did not die. We became the foundation. The world you call Earth is our memory, our vessel. When we fell, we buried our essence here. And now the circle begins again." Then for the first time, the explorers saw something impossible. The ground beneath them started to shift and the walls around them transformed into transparent glass. They were no longer underground. They were surrounded by a vision, a projection showing the entire planet glowing with thousands of points of light. Hidden deep within continents and oceans, each point represented another archive, another hidden memory. The voice spoke again. "We are not gone. We are waiting to return, through those who remember us." And with that, the vision faded. The chamber returned to silence. The explorers stood motionless, trying to process what had just happened. They realized that Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a living record of its own past, a guardian of forgotten knowledge waiting for the right moment to awaken. They looked around once more at the walls filled with glowing symbols. Every word, every image felt alive. The archives weren't just data. They were living consciousness, pieces of an ancient humanity that had transcended time. Slowly, they made their way back to the surface. The desert sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. None of them spoke. Each was lost in thought, feeling both amazed and small before the enormity of what they had witnessed. As their ship lifted off, one of them looked back at the sand below. The entrance they had opened was already closing, sealing itself as if the planet wanted it hidden once more. And then, far in the distance as the ship rose higher, they saw something faint, a line of golden light moving slowly beneath the desert surface, like veins carrying energy toward the horizon. Whatever had been awakened beneath the ice had now spread across the world. The ancient power was moving again. Back on the ship, the central computer flickered once more. New data appeared, coordinates that didn't belong to Earth. They were star positions, leading far beyond the solar system, and under the coordinates, One final message appeared on the screen. It said, "The Ascendancy remembers." The explorers stared at it in silence. None of them could explain how the computer had received the message, but deep down they all understood what it meant. The ancient humans were not just part of Earth's past. They were watching still, somewhere out there among the stars. For hours the team sat in silence inside the control room. The faint light of the monitors reflected on their tired faces, and not one of them dared to speak first. The strange message still glowed on the screen. The Ascendancy remembers. It wasn't from any satellite or known source. It came from somewhere deep under the Earth's surface. The world outside was quiet. The desert winds had died down, and only the soft hum of the ship's power core filled the air. Everyone could feel that something had changed. They had come looking for traces of ancient civilizations, but what they had found felt far beyond history. It felt alive. One of the explorers finally broke the silence. "Maybe it's an automated signal," he said, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "A leftover from the ruins we saw yesterday." But another voice replied, calm yet firm, "No system could survive for thousands of years like that, especially not one hidden under miles of sand." Their words hung heavy in the room. Deep down they all knew this was not a machine. Something was communicating with them. They decided to investigate further. The scanners were reactivated, sweeping through layers of rock and sand, digging for any clue of what might be below. The readings came back confused and incomplete. Bursts of energy, strange metallic shapes, but no heat, no movement. Just energy lines glowing faintly under the desert, stretching outward like veins. Suddenly, the communication system flickered. Static filled the air, followed by a soft, rhythmic sound. It wasn't noise, it was a pulse. Like a heartbeat. Slow, steady, and deep. Everyone froze as they listened. Then, through the static, a voice whispered one word: "Remember." The sound was so faint it could have been imagined, but each person in the room heard it clearly. Inside their head, not just through the speakers, no one moved. For a few seconds, the entire world seemed to stop. Then, without warning, the lights inside the ship dimmed, and the screens flashed with unknown symbols. The floor trembled, not violently, but as though something massive far beneath the ground had just awakened. The captain shouted, "Power systems, check them." The engineer tried to respond, but his voice broke halfway through. "All systems are responding, but not to us. The power is being redirected somewhere else." Through the window they saw something incredible. Lines of light were beginning to appear in the desert. At first it looked like sunlight reflecting off sand, but within seconds it became clear. They were patterns, perfectly shaped, spreading outward in glowing circles. They weren't natural. They were forming words, symbols, and paths that stretched beyond the horizon. "It's coming from the ruins," someone whispered. The explorers ran outside. The air felt strange, charged as though it carried electricity. Every hair on their arms stood up. The patterns in the sand were brighter now, weaving together to form what looked like a giant network, a map of energy, alive and moving. As they watched, the sky above began to shimmer faintly, as if responding to the light below. It was beautiful and terrifying at once. One explorer looked up and said quietly, "We didn't discover them. They've discovered us." At that moment, the desert wind changed direction. It carried a low hum, not mechanical but natural, almost like singing. The tones rose and fell slowly, echoing across the dunes. Back in the ship, the communication screen turned white, and words began to appear. Not typed, not transmitted, but written as if by an invisible hand. "The children of Earth have awakened. The time of remembering has begun." The crew stared in disbelief. These weren't just remnants of a civilization. This was a message, direct, intelligent, deliberate. Then the voice returned, stronger now, calm and full of emotion. "You carry our blood, our thoughts, our story. The world you walk upon is not only your home, it is us. We never left." The voice spoke in perfect harmony with the humming outside, as though the entire planet was speaking through it. No one could tell if it was male or female. It was both and neither. It felt human but ancient, like a memory given form. "When we reached the height of creation," the voice continued, "we lost ourselves. We reached for the stars without knowing our hearts. So we became part of the earth. Our knowledge turned into light, our bodies into the soil. And from that soil, you were born." The crew felt tears in their eyes. It was not fear. It was something deeper, a strange, powerful sense of belonging. One of them whispered, "So, we are them?" "Yes," the voice said gently. "You are us and we are you. You forgot because you had to. Each cycle, life begins again, wiser, calmer, but now you have remembered and the time to rise has returned." Suddenly the energy reading spiked again. The light in the desert grew brighter, rising like pillars reaching for the sky. The explorers stepped back, shielding their eyes. The pillars merged together, forming a shape, a massive structure made entirely of light, floating silently in the air. It looked like a gate. The voice spoke once more. "When the path opens, you will see what we became. Beyond this world lies the memory of all that was lost. But be careful, children of Earth. Power without heart brings only silence." Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The light faded, the humming ceased, and the sky returned to normal. For a moment, no one spoke. The ship's instruments came back online, showing nothing unusual, as if none of it had ever happened. Only the faint traces of heat in the sand remained. The captain turned slowly to face the others. "Did we just speak to our own ancestors?" No one had an answer. Later that night, while the others rested, one explorer sat alone near the window staring at the desert. He could still feel the warmth of that light on his skin, as if it had marked him somehow. The stars above looked different now, closer, friendlier. He thought about the voice's words. "You are us and we are you." If that was true, then everything humanity ever wondered about, their origin, their purpose, their loneliness, was answered. They weren't just a small race born by chance. They were part of something vast and timeless. He felt a strange peace settle over him. But deep inside, another feeling grew: curiosity. If this was the truth about Earth's past, what else lay beyond that gate of light? The next morning, the team found something new on their ship's data core, a folder that hadn't been there before. It was labeled the Memory Archive. Inside were countless symbols, diagrams, and ancient star maps. Some looked like blueprints for machines they couldn't even imagine. Others were words written in languages no one had ever seen before. But there was one simple message at the top of the file: to rise again, first remember who you are. The explorers looked at each other in silence. It wasn't just about technology. It was about identity. Humanity had always looked outward, to the stars, to the unknown, searching for answers. But maybe the truth was always beneath their feet, waiting patiently for them to stop searching and listen. As they prepared to leave the desert, one of them looked back one last time. The sand looked ordinary again, the patterns gone, the ruins buried once more. But as the sun rose higher, a faint shimmer passed over the dunes, as if something deep below was breathing, sleeping, waiting. The explorer smiled faintly. "They're still here," he whispered. "Watching us, guiding us." The ship lifted off slowly, leaving a thin cloud of dust swirling behind. From above, the desert looked peaceful and endless. Yet if you looked closely, you could still see it. The faint outline of the same patterns glowing softly, hidden just beneath the sand. They weren't gone. The Earth still remembered. And somewhere in the depths of that ancient silence, the old ones whispered once more, "Remember who you are." The ship disappeared into the blue sky, carrying not just its crew, but the weight of humanity's forgotten story. That day marked the beginning of a new age, the age of remembering. The next few days passed in quiet disbelief. The crew couldn't stop thinking about what they had seen: the glowing patterns in the desert, the voice that had spoken through light, and the message that had changed everything they believed about their own history. The ship drifted high above Earth now, circling the planet slowly. From the window they could see the blue curve of the oceans and the faint golden lines that had appeared across certain parts of the land, traces of the awakening energy that still hummed quietly beneath the surface. No one could fully understand what had happened, but one thing was clear: the Earth was no longer silent. Inside the ship, they kept studying the strange folder that had appeared in their system, the Memory Archive. It contained thousands of fragments, symbols, star maps, and coded signals pointing to distant places across the galaxy. Most of them made no sense, but one stood out. It showed a single set of coordinates far beyond the solar system, near a cluster of stars known only for their ancient myths. The note beside it simply said, "The source of the first light." The crew couldn't ignore it. Whatever it was, it felt connected to the same power that had spoken to them. After long discussion, they decided to follow it. Not out of curiosity alone, but out of responsibility. They had been chosen to remember, and now they needed to understand what came next. The engines fired quietly, and the ship began to move beyond Earth's orbit. The blue planet grew smaller and smaller behind them until it was just a soft dot surrounded by stars. For days, they traveled in silence. The space around them was empty, dark and endless. Yet as they got closer to the coordinates, strange lights began to appear. Faint streams of gold drifting through the darkness like rivers. These weren't stars or asteroids. They looked like trails of energy, living, flowing, leading somewhere. When the ship crossed into that field of light, everything changed. The air inside the cabin felt heavier, and a deep vibration passed through the hull, soft but powerful, like a distant song. One of the explorers whispered, "It feels like someone is calling." The navigation screen flickered, and the same calm voice they had heard before returned. "You have followed the path. The time has come to see." Ahead of them, the darkness parted, revealing something no human eyes had ever seen. Floating in space was a structure larger than a planet, built of pure light and stone. It shimmered with moving symbols, the same ones they had seen under the desert. It wasn't a city or a ship. It was something in between. It looked alive. They approached carefully, and as they neared the glowing structure, it began to open. The light expanded outward, forming a vast gateway that pulsed gently as if breathing. The ship's controls responded on their own, guiding them inside. No one spoke. They were too overwhelmed by what they were seeing. Inside the gate, there was no gravity. They floated through a silent field of color and mist, where images appeared and vanished like dreams. Faces, oceans, forests, stars being born and dying. Every vision felt familiar, like pieces of a memory they didn't know they had. Then the voice spoke again, echoing all around them. "This is where we ascended when our world ended. We became part of creation itself. Every star that shines carries our memory. Every planet that grows life carries our spirit. And every being that learns to love carries our heart." The explorers floated quietly, listening. The voice didn't sound distant anymore. It was warm, close, as if it was speaking from within their own thoughts. "We were not gods," it said gently. "We were human, just as you are. We reached beyond our limits without balance. So the universe taught us. It took everything, and gave us understanding in return." A soft light surrounded the ship. Their instruments started displaying endless streams of data. Unknown elements, languages, music, and patterns of life spread across the galaxy. It was the full history of existence flowing like water into their minds. Then the light gathered into a single image before them, the shape of a human figure made entirely of light and energy. It was neither male nor female. Its eyes glowed softly, filled with calm. "You are our continuation," it said. "The cycle of forgetting is over. You have remembered who you are. What you do next will shape all that comes after." The figure raised its hand, and an image of Earth appeared beside it, glowing, peaceful, alive. The same golden patterns that had awakened in the desert now covered the whole planet, stretching through oceans and mountains, lighting it up like a beating heart. "Earth has awakened," the figure said. "The spirit of the planet is alive again. It will guide you now if you choose to listen." One of the explorers, with tears in his eyes, asked softly, "Why us? Why now?" The figure smiled gently. "Because you were ready. You looked for truth without greed. You searched not for power but for understanding. The universe responds to the heart that listens. You listened." The room went silent again. Then the figure reached forward, touching the ship with its glowing hand. Instantly, a pulse of golden light spread through every surface. The explorers felt a wave of warmth, not painful, not frightening, just pure peace. Images flashed before their eyes again. A future Earth, cities powered by light, people working in harmony with nature, children playing under skies free of smoke. Humanity was thriving, not through domination but through understanding. Then the vision faded. The figure spoke one last time. "Do not forget this. The stars will always call to you, but never forget where your light was born. The Earth is not just your home. It is your beginning. The light around them started to fade. The figure slowly dissolved into the golden mist, and the gate began to close. The ship drifted backward, carried gently by an invisible force, until they were back in open space. When they looked again, the massive structure had disappeared completely. Only the quiet stars remained. No one said a word for a long time. They were all breathing heavily, their hearts racing, their minds filled with everything they had just seen. Finally, one of them spoke softly. "We met them, the ones who came before us, and they were us." The others nodded slowly. There was no disbelief anymore. Only acceptance. The ship turned toward the blue light of Earth in the distance. As they began their journey home, something strange happened. The golden light from the gate still shimmered faintly around their ship, like a silent companion guiding them. When they re-entered Earth's orbit, the sensors showed something amazing. The energy lines beneath the surface had spread across the entire planet. Every continent glowed faintly, invisible to the naked eye but alive on the scanners. It was as if the Earth itself was breathing, reborn. As the explorers landed, a soft vibration ran through the ground. It wasn't an earthquake, and it was a pulse. The same steady heartbeat they had heard in the desert. They stepped out and looked at the sky. The clouds moved gently, forming patterns for a brief second, the same ones they had seen under the sand so long ago. It was as if the planet was saying, "Welcome back." In that quiet moment, they understood. Humanity was never truly alone. The old ones were never gone. They had become the earth, the air, the stars, and everything. And now that their children had remembered, a new chapter was beginning. That night, one of the explorers sat outside the ship, looking at the horizon. The wind was calm and the air felt alive. The stars twinkled brighter than ever before. He thought about what the voice had said. "Do not seek to rule the stars until you have learned to rule yourselves." He smiled faintly. For the first time, those words truly made sense. The future wasn't about conquering space. It was about understanding life, he whispered softly. "We'll do better this time." Far above him, a faint golden shimmer moved through the night sky, just for a moment, like a silent promise from those who came before. And then, all was quiet again. The earth turned peacefully beneath the stars, carrying within it both the past and the future of humanity. The cycle of forgetting had ended. The cycle of remembering had begun.